Okay, we left off with Alexander the Great witnessing his father's death, and a few things about that. Alexander seeing that, it really had a large impact on him. And so when he began to attack the Persian Empire, he was not just attacking it out of ambition, but he was also attacking it out of revenge. And he went on to create the world's largest empire. And it started by him conquering the Persian Empire, which was the largest empire the world had seen to that point. His army initially totaled 37,000 Greek men. 5,000 of them were cavalry. Meanwhile, the Persian Empire, it was estimated that they had between 200,000 and 1 million soldiers. But one of the things that Alexander did along the way, with each battle, he would recruit soldiers into his army. Now this did two things. First off, it made his men who were with him the whole time, it gave him the ability to promote them to higher ranks within the military, so to speak. And secondly, it also enlarged his armies. However, one thing it also did was it made the army progressively less Greek and Greek as it went along. So Alexander, as he went through these conquests, would also become less and less Greek looking, to the point that by the time he's attacking India, he's looking almost like a Persian king. His empire would end up stretching from the Indus River Valley to the Danube River in Europe. So from the Indus River Valley in India to the Danube River in Europe. That's a huge, huge area. And along the way, he won many battles. But on his way, his soldier, he wanted to continue on, even though he had won in India. He wanted to continue on. He wanted to rule the world. However, his army basically mutinied at this point. They had been away from their families for a decade, and they were like, enough's enough. It is time for us to return home. So, Alexander, in the year 323, begins his return trek home. He stops in Babylon on his way back to Pella. And when he's in Babylon, he gets a mysterious illness. And in June 323, he passes away. And there's a lot to do about this illness. How did he really die? Was he poisoned? Was it infection from wounds he may have had? Was it a fever? Was it something else? And truth is, we don't really know what killed Alexander. But what we do know is that upon his death, he had not named a successor. On his deathbed, he was asked who should take over his empire, and his last words were simply the strongest, and that was it. So what eventually happened was that his empire would be split amongst his 5 strongest generals, and we learned about one of those generals already. His name was Ptolemy the First. And Ptolemy would end up ruling the region that today is known as Egypt. And he would present himself to the Egyptian people as a pharaoh. And that's basically the last dynasty of ancient Egypt. We've already learned about that. But why was Alexander so successful? Well, he was a master of strategy and tactics in the military realm. First off, he had the phalanx that he inherited from his father, the Macedonian phalanx with the pikes. But he was also a master of mind games. Um, there was one particular battle where he was about ready to go in, and there was a city with high on a fortified cliff, and his men were next to that cliff as well. And there was like a ravine between the city and Alexander, and he yells up at the king, "Surrender or die! But if you surrender, I will show mercy. But if you make us fight, I will have no mercy on you." And that king said that this fortress has never been captured before. What makes you think that you can capture it now? And he turns and he points to 10 of his men and he orders them to march until he says stop. And 10 of his men literally march towards a cliff and fall off the cliff to their death. And then he points to the king up above and says, "My men are willing to die for me. Are your men willing to die for you?" The king, seeing this, surrendered to Alexander. Now, that was a psychological ploy, and it worked. He also, in the Battle of Tyre, he had a bridge literally built across the 2 miles into the Mediterranean Sea to capture the city of Tyre. So he was a he was a master of architecture. He was a master of tactics and strategy. He was well studied. He was fearless. Like his father, he would lead his men into battle. He was willing to risk his own life. Um, in India, he would be the first to leap over a city wall in order to inspire his troops to continue on into battle. And he was able to conquer for a significant amount of time. If you look, um, for that decade, basically, from 336 to 323, I know it's 13 years, but just stick with me. For that 13-year period, he's the strongest leader in the world. He also is going to have a legacy that affects the world today. He merges Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Greek culture together. And this merging is going to cause uh, cultural diffusion of these ideas to meld together. And when a bunch of ideas from a bunch of different regions come together, we call that globalization. And Alexander the Great was one of those who ushered in the Hellenistic age, where Greek culture spread from India to Spain, basically. He was a big part of that. But let's also be honest, his empire only lasted about a decade or two. And then it would be split up amongst his five generals. And then, you know, yeah, they were close, but they were battling and fighting each other. And if you're looking at, for example, ancient Egypt was around for thousands of years. His his empire is around as a unified empire for a smidge over a decade. Does he really deserve the title the Great? So here's what I'm going to ask you to do as your assignment. You're going to write a 7 to 10 sentence paragraph. And it's going to be an assignment listed on Schoology. And it is simply, does Alexander deserve to be considered the Great? Why or why not? And be sure to use details. So, one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is look up information about Alexander the Great. Um, And you're going to write a paragraph, a well written academic paragraph. Does Alexander deserve the term the Great? Is he great? Yes or no? That's up to you. I'm going to leave it there for you guys. All right. I will see you tomorrow, hopefully, at school. If not, have a wonderful day.